Deadly creatures, godlike bosses, and terrifying new worlds to explore. My name is Kodiak, this is Legacy Gaming. Grab your guns, give the good boys some pats, and get ready, because today we're diving into Gunfire Games' long-awaited sequel, Remnant 2. There's no doubt that Remnant 2 will continue to build upon the foundation of Remnant from the Ashes, but for new players that may not have had the chance to play that first game, I think it's important we establish what Remnant 2 is and what it isn't. Remnant 2 is first and foremost a third-person Souls-like with guns. The game releases on July 25th, 2023 with all the trappings of classic Souls games, including challenging enemies, an all-important dodge mechanic, the collection of a resource in order to unlock powerful upgrades, and of course, the high level of difficulty synonymous with the genre. What you also might not realize about the Remnant series is that while everyone starts their adventures from a very specific square one, the game is designed around replaying the story with the same character multiple times. The bosses, dungeons, and even sometimes the enemy composition you'll encounter will be randomized, and to collect all of the weapons and rewards available in the game, you'll need to play through Remnant 2 multiple times, sometimes on different difficulties. You'll unlock new archetypes, gear, weapons, and traits, slowly building up an arsenal that'll transfer with you from playthrough to playthrough, allowing you to build your character exactly how you want. Remnant from the Ashes may be one of Livid's all-time favorite games, but it was by no means a perfect game, and because Remnant 2 is a sequel, I think we should highlight some notable quality of life improvements. For starters, stamina will no longer be consumed outside of combat. While this means exploration won't feel like a complete slog when traversing the world and exploring secrets, stamina will be a resource you need to more tightly manage within fights. Second, world generation has been ramped up and feeds into the game's overall replayability. In Remnant from the Ashes, there were only a handful of tile sets that could be strung together for some variation, but all enemies in that world, along with boss fights and secrets, would play out much the same way. Remnant 2 flips that on its head. The story is no longer one linear path, and while there is a common thread that runs through the entire game, each biome has multiple self-contained stories that can generate when you load in. This means you and your friends could all load into the game separately, all get placed in Yeisha for your first biome, but each one of you could end up with a completely different self-contained story. This even goes a step further with the introduction of something called injectables, special encounters or mini dungeon elements that can be generated onto any of the major or minor dungeons in the game. A breakable wall that opens up into an arena in one person's game might be a solid wall with nothing behind it in another's. Pathways, enemies, and more all get randomized with every playthrough, making no two runs play out in the same way. This level of depth means navigating the world becomes that much more important, and quite a few players found the map in Remnant from the Ashes to be unclear at times. The Remnant 2 map has been completely overhauled. It's now fully 3D and extremely clear on where terrain changes height, where an object in your vision can be collected, and even where objectives are located. Hovering over any of these icons on your map will also display important contextual information. The UI has also received a substantial facelift. Health, debuff, and buff information now displays prominently at the bottom center of the screen. If you're ever unsure of a particular effect, you'll be able to hover over these icons in the top left of your character screen to see exactly what is happening to your character. You might have also noticed that when you take damage in Remnant 2, 50% of that damage becomes gray health. This is now health that recovers slowly over time. The cool thing, there are now items, methods, and even full builds that can play into this gray health system, regenerating it more quickly or leveraging it for other benefits. In the same vein, you'll need to know if you're prepared or not for the environment you're entering, something that was a pain point for many players back in Remnant from the Ashes. Above your minimap, next to the name of the zone you're in, you'll see a number that tells you the power level of the enemies in the region. If your gear level is below that number, the challenges ahead will be significantly more difficult, and you'll need to upgrade your gear in order to keep progressing. Along with these major quality of life updates comes numerous system overhauls that aims to take build crafting and playstyles to entirely new levels, while also ensuring difficulty remains relevant. In Remnant from the Ashes, armor sets had distinct bonuses tied to them based on if you were utilizing 1, 2, or the full 3 pieces of gear. This largely restricted a player's decision when it came to build crafting for several reasons. These not only directly influenced how much damage they naturally mitigated in combat, but also had a direct impact on your dodge mechanic. Light and medium armor offered distinctly better iframes than heavy armor, with super heavy seeing your character flopping to the ground with what you could barely call a dodge. Because of this, the bonuses that were associated with these sets of armor often directly correlated with the weight and armor value, essentially pigeonholing players into specific progression playstyles. Armor weight coupled with rigid set bonuses restricted build crafting immensely. Sure, there were trinkets that allowed you to take advantage of mixing two sets, but most of the time a full set was vastly superior to a combination. This also meant you couldn't just wear what looked cool, as doing so would likely impact or even ruin your build. While weight classes are still a thing on each set of armor in Remnant 2, you'll be glad to know that set bonuses are not, and those cool effects didn't just vanish. Instead, the brand new Archetype system aims to not only fill the void, but massively expand its horizons. Humans aren't magical in the world of Remnant, but they can do magical things when empowered with the right objects. The new Archetype system showcased in this menu here allows you to equip magical objects on either the left, the prime archetype, or the right side, the sub-archetype. In this case, the iron cylinder is equipped on the left, granting Gunslinger. On the right, the steel Endswell is slotted, granting Challenger. These and many more items you collect during your various playthroughs will dictate which archetypes you'll have at your disposal, and each comes with its own unique trait, perks, and skills. While they can't be changed, they can be improved, but let's go over exactly what each of these things are. Let's start with signature archetype traits, indicated by these two sections just under the item slot. Every archetype has one, and initially is only available when its specific item is equipped. You won't see these signature traits by default on the universal trait page, but luckily that won't always be the case. Each archetype in Remnant 2 can be leveled up through experience, and as you increase your item's level, these unique traits will automatically level up for free until you cap out at level 10. This is important for several reasons. Unlike the first game, Remnant 2 will have limited trait points to use. You won't be able to max out every single stat and become an unstoppable killing machine. Luckily, we were able to confirm with the developers that players will be able to respec their traits at any time to experiment with entirely different builds. This means a signature trait is effectively a free, fully leveled trait that your build can tap into for extremely potent effects. When your archetype item reaches max level, that trait then becomes unlocked for any archetype to use on that aforementioned trait page. The catch: signature traits being used via that trait page will require you to spend trait points to use. This means not only can signature trait builds become a thing if you put in the time and effort to unlock them, but the variety these traits can bring to other archetypes can be substantial. Traits aren't the only thing improved when you level up your archetypes, and this brings us to Archetype Perks. On the far left and far right side of this menu, beneath the traits, you'll see 4 fixed perk slots. Every single archetype will have unique, unchangeable perks that fill 4 different categories. Damage perks, as the name suggests, scale the damage output of your character. This includes individual augments to things like ranged buffs, melee buffs, mod power buffs, and skill damage buffs. The second slot, Team Perks, will affect all allies whether you're playing alone or in a group. This doesn't just mean player allies, but also any NPCs or summons you pick up along the way. You can expect to see buffs here to team defense, shared healing, or even increased ammo drops. The third slot, Utility Perks, is for quality of life effects. It's typically a small buff that blends well with the rest of the archetype's gameplay elements. A perfect example, if your archetype relies on sprinting and evading, a utility perk might help to reduce your overall stamina cost or consumption. Finally, in the fourth slot, we have the Relic perk. These are temporary effects that become active for a short duration whenever you use a relic. For all you Remnant veterans or Souls fans out there, these were called Dragon Hearts before and are what you use to heal unlimited charges. The buffs in this category have been teased as potent and able to turn the tide of an encounter, but are directly limited to how many relic charges you have left. Think back to something like the Believer armor set bonus in Remnant from the Ashes, where using a Dragon Heart would buff you and your allies' damage significantly for 30 seconds. This is essentially that, just moved to a relic slot and not bound to any armor. There is one more perk we have to talk about, the Prime perk, which is always dictated by the archetype item in your left slot. These are the core identity of an archetype and provide a significant benefit that no other archetype or item can provide. For example, the Gunslinger's Prime perk is loaded, which makes it so when activating any Gunslinger skill, both of your weapons will instantly reload and gain infinite reserve ammo for 15 seconds, allowing you to absolutely unload onto your target. All perks are unlocked sequentially as you level up your archetype, including your signature perk. Levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 unlock each perk in order, with 5 being the signature perk. From levels 6 to 10, this process starts over and every perk gets enhanced. It's a really cool system that rewards time investment. Last up, let's talk Archetype Skills. These are the 3 dramatically illustrated icons directly beneath each item slot and are special abilities that can only be used by that archetype. While there are 3 skills per class, you can only have 1 active at a time. Thankfully, you can actively switch between any of your unlocked skills as long as you're not in combat. These operate on a cooldown system rather than something like mod power buildup, which is still its own system. These are on longer cooldowns, and the intention here is to balance their use, making skills feel more strategic when and where you use them. The decision to slot an item into your primary or secondary slot will have very real impact on your playstyle. Once again, a fantastic addition to the game. If it isn't clear by this point, you can have dual archetypes. You'll quickly come to realize that Remnant is effectively evolving from having only 2 active abilities via mod charges to 4 active abilities, 2 from skills and 2 from mod charges, opening up build crafting and unique playstyles even more. When players combine 2 archetypes in Remnant 2, they effectively create a class. In this example, the Iron Cylinder is slotted in the Prime archetype slot on the left, also awarding the player the Prime perk Loaded. The Steel Endswell is slotted in the sub-archetype slot on the right, not awarding a Prime perk, but still granting you access to a unique trait, 4 additional perks, and 3 additional skills to choose from. Based on what archetypes are slotted in the 2 slots, your class name will be generated so that other players can immediately recognize what you're using and how you might play. For instance, since Gunslinger is slotted on the left as the Prime archetype and Challenger is slotted as the secondary archetype, the game will look at these 2 archetypes and form a predetermined name for that class. In this case, Mercenary. Regardless of which side these 2 archetypes are on, when combined, these 2 archetypes together will always be known as Mercenary. The game also looks at the Prime archetype's main perk and will slap that in front of Mercenary, in this instance, Loaded Mercenary. This means at a glance, players can immediately recognize that your Prime slot is Gunslinger and your secondary is Challenger, and they'll generally know what to expect you'll be bringing to the table. Every single class combination has its own name, so there should never be any confusion once players are experienced enough and should, keyword should, improve the multiplayer experiences. At the end of the day, let's call archetypes what they really are: classes. When starting a new game in Remnant from the Ashes, everyone had to pick between 3 starting classes: the Scrapper, the Ex-Cultist, and the Hunter. Each one came with a specific armor set with a set bonus, a distinct primary, secondary, and melee weapon, a special mod, and a starting perk. However, all of that, regardless of your choice, could be found in pieces from various sources throughout the game. In Remnant 2, these are archetypes you'll be picking from, and this time, the options have increased right from the get-go. Here, you'll get a trademark armor set not tied to a specific sort of set bonus, a unique primary, secondary, and melee weapon, and a specific archetype item that, as we went over previously, replaces not only the armor set bonus, but grants a whole host of perks, skills, and a signature archetype trait tied to each item. Now don't worry, while your starting choice does impact your playstyle and build to begin with, everything in each starting archetype can be found somewhere in the world of Remnant, just not likely when you want it, so still pick your starting class wisely. The first archetype we'll be talking about is the Gunslinger, activated by slotting the Iron Cylinder item. It's the ideal class to pick up if you're aiming for high fire rate, weapon handling, and overall ammo efficiency. This is the class that pure damage enthusiasts will likely gravitate to, and everything is geared towards maximizing DPS. The special archetype trait, Ammo Reserves, enables the class to increase ammo reserves up to 100%, ensuring that no combination of skills or weapons will leave you running dry. With this trait in mind, it's no surprise all the perks lean into maximizing overall DPS. Swift Shot increases fire rate, range damage, and crit chance for all firearms. Posse Up awards additional ammo per play and causes ammo boxes to drop additional ammo on the ground. Quick Hands increases firearm reload speed and doubles if the magazine is empty. Finally, Sleight of Hand increases your overall range damage and reloads your firearm whenever a relic is used. The class's Prime perk, Loaded, reloads both of your weapons and grants you infinite ammo reserves for 15 seconds whenever you activate any Gunslinger skill, leaving your ammo economy untouched but keeping the lead flying. Finally, we have to talk about your 3 skills. Quick Draw pulls out your trusty side piece and unloads a certain amount of rounds, split evenly amongst all enemies in view. Holding and releasing the skill allows you to aim the weapon manually and turn into a super shot, guaranteeing a crit with 6x damage. This one is on a relatively short cooldown, and given its flexibility with hitting multiple targets or one large target, Quick Draw will be hard to pass up for any build. Next up is Sidewinder. When activated, it increases ADS movement speed and weapon draw swap speeds. Additionally, you'll fully reload weapons just by cycling between them, granting you ridiculous amounts of sustained damage. Finally, there's Bullet Storm, which makes every firearm fully automatic, boosts fire rate, and ramps up reload speed. And to top it off, it even grants special perks for bows and crossbows. If you do long for a DPS class that rains lead like no other, then the Gunslinger might just be the class for you. Next up, let's look at the Handler, who traverses the various worlds with none other than a trusty canine companion. This class is activated by equipping the Silent Whistle, and really, this is the ideal choice if you enjoy playing solo or to heavily augment your teammates within battle. I'm happy to report that your dog companion can never truly die. When incapacitated, he just needs a bit of encouragement to get back into the fight. If at any time during combat your dog is running low on health, just being near him will start health regen. Give him a few pats and the dog regens even faster. The archetype trait Kinship reduces friendly fire damage both dealt and received by up to 80%. It shouldn't take a lot of convincing to understand this will be critical to ensuring you, your pet, and your team are able to survive more difficult content, especially when it comes to explosive weapons. Now, the Handler really is a jack of all trades, and that's increasingly apparent when we look at the wide variety of stat boosts provided by perks. The damage perk Pack Hunter grants a sizable boost to ranged and skill damage. This is further increased if you're within a certain range of your furry friend. Next, Spirit of the Wolf increases you and your allies' movement speed and also reduces the stamina cost of all allied actions. Teamwork boosts the Handler and Companion's revive speed by a massive amount, and when reviving, you'll take less damage and your companion is slightly more difficult to stagger. Finally, Best Friend will fully heal your companion and boost their damage and damage resistance whenever you consume a relic charge. Now, the Prime perk Bonded is absolutely a game changer for both solo players and teams alike. When you're taken down, your companion will attempt to revive you up to 50% max health. This can be used on allies as well, as long as they still have at least one relic charge remaining. Even if an ally is down out in the open, that trusty pooch will be there to help you out. In addition to all of the things your companion already does, you can issue commands like attack, heal to your side, or even guard an ally. I think we're starting to see who the real star of the show is here. In this case, the class skills are replaced by behaviors, which instead change the function of your companion and even grant them unique passive buffs. For all of these behaviors, single tapping will have your companion engage enemies at the targeted location, while double tapping will have the companion return to the handler's side. Each are also accompanied by a special howl that brings additional depth to the behavior. First, Guard Dog causes your companion to generate more threat and take less damage, drawing aggro away from you and your teammates. Holding the behavior will trigger a howl that generates increased threat and reduces the damage on all allies in a large AoE. Next, Support Dog will continuously heal allies near the companion in a small AoE. When held, the howl will rapidly heal and boost the movement speed of all allies in a larger AoE. And finally, Attack Dog will increase your companion's damage. When held, the howl will also massively boost the damage for you and all allies in a large AoE. The Handler really is an outstanding solo or party assist class. If you lean more towards support roles, then this may be right up your alley. And hey, having a furry friend is definitely an added bonus. The third archetype we'll be talking about is the Challenger, activated by slotting the Steel Endswell item. The Challenger allows players to make more efficient use of heavier armor sets, reducing stamina consumption and bolstering you and your team's damage and defenses. This is the class that's geared towards reducing enemy damage while amping your own stats based on the overall density of the threats in front of you. The special archetype trait Strong Back reduces your overall encumbrance by 1 per level, allowing armor sets to function like sets of lower weight classes. It's clear based on this trait alone you'll be taking advantage of the damage mitigation of heavier sets, so it's no surprise the perks all lean into that. Close Quarters boosts your ranged and melee damage based on how many enemies are within a set distance. Intimidating Presence reduces the damage all enemies deal within a fixed radius after using a Challenger skill, becoming more potent based on the number of enemies affected. Powerlifter reduces the stamina cost and stamina regen delay by 50% for all weight brackets. Finally, Face of Danger grants you stacks of Bulwark and increased damage whenever you use a relic within range of an enemy, allowing you to better fight off hordes that catch you off guard. Your Prime perk, Die Hard, gives the challenger a second wind when receiving fatal damage, slamming the ground, becoming invulnerable for a short period of time, and regenerating max health. This is on a very long cooldown. Last up, we have to talk about the 3 challenger skills. The first skill, War Stomp, creates a high-impact tremor that deals damage and additionally staggers enemies in a frontal cone, but also deals damage in all directions at point-blank range. The second skill, Juggernaut, makes the player become nearly unstoppable, gaining Bulwark, increasing movement and melee speed, and increasing melee damage. Stagger damage to the player is also reduced by 1 level. Finally, we have Rampage, where the challenger enters a heightened state of battle, increasing fire rate, reload speed, and movement speed. Dealing high damage to enemies grants 1 stack of Rage, which increases range damage by a fixed amount per stack. Upon reaching 10 stacks, the challenger goes berserk, reloading their current firearm and doubling the Rampage effect for a moderate duration. This is the class for players who like to be up in the face of enemy hordes, especially melee users, drawing their aggro and knocking them down, all while keeping your allies protected in the process. While not yet revealed, we do know that a medic-themed archetype and sharpshooter-themed archetype are coming. We've seen hints of both in recently released trailers and gameplay clips, but without official information, we chose not to speculate for the sake of this video. Now, if there's one new system overhaul that shocked us, it's Relics. For those who played Remnant from the Ashes, you know these simply as Dragon Hearts, essentially your Dark Souls Estus Flask. You have a limited number of charges, and you'd leverage them to heal yourself. That was pretty much the limit of these items. That's not the case anymore in Remnant 2. These are now called Relics, and they play a fundamental role in your build. Dragon Hearts still exist, but they're just one type of relic. There are many, many more you'll be able to find and use as you explore the various worlds, and they can range from burst heals and heals over time, all the way down to defensive and stat augmenting bonuses when activated. But that's not all. Your relic slot also has 3 relic fragment slots. These are items that can drop from various sources, such as challenging encounters, special enemies, and ornate chests. These can be added to your relics to apply a new effect whenever a relic is consumed, such as boosting your crit damage, applying shields, and more. And you can change out these fragments at any time, similar to the jewelry system. The last cool thing about this system, you'll never need to manually upgrade these. As you increase in gear level, same type fragments will begin dropping with more potent stats, and the game will automatically replace them with the highest stat value you've acquired, turning the old ones into Relic Dust, an item you can then use to roll 4 chances at higher stat fragments at a new vendor. As we mentioned before, traits have been overhauled. You can no longer fully level up every single trait and trivialize content that's meant to be challenging. You'll need to specifically invest a limited amount of trait points into your traits that matter the most to your build. If you want to be an absolute glass cannon, you're finally going to feel like glass when you get hit. To some, you might hate this change, but to us, we welcome it. For now, the limit is hanging around 85 total trait points that you can allocate, but that can and likely will change over time. The main reason this feels like the right move is because you'll be able to fully respec your trait points at any time. No hidden resource cost, no trophy system where you need to find incredibly rare items to do so. Simply pull out your points and reallocate them where you'd like. This makes builds much more meaningful for tackling the hardest difficulties, but also allows even the newest players to experiment with what feels best to them. Additionally, every player will start with the same 4 basic traits unlocked: Vigor to increase your max health, Endurance to increase your total stamina, Spirit to generate your mod power generation rate as you deal damage, and Expertise, a new trait that will aid in reducing your skill's cooldown. The developers have also mentioned that all flat damage perks have been removed from the game. These were boring, and in most cases, every single build in the game ran them. Instead, they want traits to focus on being important decisions that influence your stats and are key factors in making a build functional. You'll acquire traits from bosses, quests, and various puzzles in the world, while trait points will come from killing bosses, finding books on the ground, and from taking down aberrations, special super elites that randomly spawn and have their own distinct rewards. One of the biggest complaints seen across the Remnant community was that melee combat just didn't feel entirely viable. Sure, there was a handful of players that managed insane apocalypse runs using only melee weapons, but these were some of the highest skilled players in the community who understood every nuance about the game. For the rest of us mortals, melee combat just didn't satisfy. It makes sense though, considering melee weapons were never meant to be a focus in a primarily gun-based game. That being said, in Remnant 2, melee weapons, and by association, melee builds, are receiving a massive upgrade. Not only are there more melee weapons at your disposal, but the fluidity of melee attacks feels so much more satisfying. There are even a variety of new attack animations to accompany multiple new styles of melee weapons, such as the Greatsword or Steel Katana. This, combined with archetypes like the Challenger and new traits that lean heavy into melee, brings a more satisfied Souls-like melee experience to the table for those that want it. We've seen a ton of brand new weapons in the trailers and gameplay so far. Notable ones include the fully automatic drum-fed shotgun, the AS-10 Bulldog, used to devastating effect, a brand new XMG 57 Bonesaw light machine gun that takes forever to reload but has an insanely high capacity magazine that gets more accurate the longer it fires, the introduction of the bow and arrow, marking a brand new weapon type, a new grenade launcher to explode some spirits, a much quicker firing Mosin-like rifle, the brand new iron greatsword that looks like it's made with a giant steel saw featuring an exceptional attack animation, and various other returning weapons like the SMG, hunting rifle, and more. We even got a look at the Twisted Arbalist, what is essentially a rework of the fan favorite Ricochet rifle, whose attacks can bounce up to 5 enemies. The featured mod, Guardian's Call, can then be activated to call down high damaging swords on all targets you've marked. It's a seriously impressive weapon that'll sure to be a build staple for many. Brabus, the bandit boss from Remnant from the Ashes, is also now an arms dealer right from the start in Ward 13. Here you'll be able to purchase a nauseating amount of weapons pretty much as soon as you begin the game. A majority of the weapons here are the loadouts of the 5 starting archetypes, but there is also a handful of other ranged and melee offerings mixed in, giving you some serious flexibility. You'll be happy to know upgrading your gear largely remained the same. You'll still interact with Ava McCabe to craft mods and special boss weapons, a couple of which we've seen in action. Things like Root Lash, which is essentially a souped-up version of the Tentacle Pod mod from the Curse of the Jungle God weapon in Remnant 1, where the tentacles will now move and track enemies. We also saw Tremor, allowing you to fire a projectile into the ground, spawning damaging shockwaves for a short duration, as well as Concussive Shot, allowing you to fire a focused blast of air through all targets that deal incredibly high stagger damage. On the weapon side of things, rigs will still be your go-to for upgrades. The big difference is you'll no longer need to upgrade armor in Remnant 2. The weight, defense bonus, and resistances are what you get when you pick up the item. This leaves players with more resources they can invest into the ludicrous amount of weapons available in the game. Of course, you'll have to pay for these upgrades, but the constant need to smash open every pot and box in a biome is no longer required. Exploration of the environment is much more important in order to find regular and ornate chests hidden within each zone. These will drop a majority of your basic resources, with ornate chests offering greater rewards. As for scrap, you'll no longer need to manually pick it up. As soon as scrap drops, it'll automatically get pulled into your bags, alleviating the frustration of running around the map collecting loot. Finally, and I'm sure some of you have noticed this already, but our character can now equip 4 rings and 1 necklace, nearly doubling the build possibility in just your jewelry alone. And let me tell you, there are a ridiculous amount of trinkets to collect this time around. So, as you can see, the loot chase is still a major highlight within Remnant 2, and the Gunfire Games team is clearly committed to making sure whatever your preferred playstyle is, it's present in the game. Whenever players enter a realm for the first time, their location is dynamically generated, pulling from a list of map segments, items, dungeons, events, NPCs, locations, and even bosses, randomizing them, ensuring that each playthrough is unique. In addition to evolving the core gameplay systems, Gunfire Games is also ramping up the sheer variety of environments, the level of detail, and the things to do within each realm. By the time all DLC was complete for Remnant from the Ashes, players had access to 5 realms in total: the debris-ridden apocalyptic Earth, the corrosive swamps of Corsus, the sun-drenched desert environment of Ram, the lush, vibrant, and lethal jungles of Yesha, and the unforgiving Arctic realm of Risum. As of right now, we have no idea if Corsus, Ram, or Risum are making a return in Remnant 2, as we haven't seen any footage from those worlds. Earth and Yesha, however, are confirmed to be returning. In Remnant 2, we're now several decades past the events of Remnant from the Ashes, and while Earth is still riddled with debris and the husk of skyscrapers, nature has clearly made a comeback, bringing some much-needed color to what was probably the most boring biome in Remnant from the Ashes. We haven't seen much else in regards to what's new with the biome, but it's exciting nonetheless. We'll also be returning to Yeisha, formerly a lush and vibrant world, home to the once great and flourishing Pan civilization. It's now been completely overrun by the Root, and is only a matter of time before Yeisha is turned into a decimated husk of a world. What started with initial scouting parties of Root Dracopedes has now become an overwhelming and diverse invasion force. The statues, temples, and even sacred jungles of the Pan have been completely overrun by the corrupted tendrils of the Root, from the crystalline caverns below to the floating land masses atop the treetops. The Pan appear to be on their last leg, only catching glimpses of surviving Pan warriors and our first look at the Red Empress. The Root presses her on all fronts while the rebel caste of Pan slaves resists her, resulting in a hopeless battle, suffering losses on two fronts. This is the setting our character will most likely make a major intervention. Even the Ravager, a being that predated the Pan and a crucial being to the balance of all things on Yeisha, was left for dead by our hero in Remnant from the Ashes. In an act of self-preservation, the Ravager struck a deal to serve the Root in their conquest of Yeisha in exchange for eternal life and power, but we'll see if we don't have something to say about that. In addition to Earth and Yeisha, we know a brand new realm, Losum, will be prominent in Remnant 2. It's a really unique realm, as it's actually the result of the Dran and Fey worlds merging into one. Supposedly, the Imposter King is the one to blame for this occurrence, and the merging has not only caused chaos and confusion amongst the different races, but the resulting dystopian landscape leaves many questioning if their worlds will ever be the same again. The once human-like Dran have become hive-minded, easily provoked into frenzies. The Fey society has also lost its direction, with the nobility sitting restless in their halls, plagued with a never-ending thirst for the life force of the Dran. The awoken Dran, those who have remained unchanged after the merger, are seen as troublemakers by the rest of Dran society, punished for speaking out against the chaos, and is likely the part of society our character will interact with neutrally. The big bad we'll likely face here is the Nightweaver, an entity once worshipped by the Fae as the goddess of sleep, is now a terrifying entity that haunts the nightmares of the Dran, feeding on the life force of her victims. At the time of making this ultimate preview, we've also seen a glimpse of an entirely new world, one that's sure to pique some interest. What's most striking about this unknown location is how dark and desolate it looks to be, while also appearing technologically advanced. It gives off alien vibes in a way, and is clearly home to secrets galore. Judging by a recent trailer, it's also home to incredibly deadly enemies, scientific experiments, and larger-than-life boss fights. The last location we need to briefly talk about is the Labyrinth. We saw this briefly in the trailer, but we weren't sure if this was a whole new biome or just a link between worlds like in Remnant from the Ashes. There looks to be 5 locations in total, or those slivers could shrink as we discover more. We really have no way of knowing for sure at this point. One of the highlights that made Remnant from the Ashes so damn good is the enemy design. Everything had multiple attacks, distinct functions within a horde, and were recognizable not only from a silhouette perspective, but from unique sound cues and even the most chaotic fights. Remnant 2 is dramatically expanding on the variety of enemies that will seek to cause us harm at each and every turn. So let's take a look at a few of them as we come to the tail end of our ultimate preview. The Root don't seem to be slowing down when it comes to both taking over worlds and evolving their forces. So far, we've seen the following new enemy types. The Root Behemoth is a terrifying new elite monstrosity that transforms its arms into throwable, explosive axes. Yes, you heard me right. You'll also need to contend with this beast in close range as well, dodging relentless whirlwind-like attacks. The Root Horror is back as the Root Terror, and this time as an elite. You'll need to watch out for its deadly axe swing and even deadlier ranged snare attack that will leave you trapped and ready for a beating. Given that the Root have all but taken over Yeisha, it's fitting that new elites would spring up looking like the Pan that they've consumed. Mimicking the Pan Impaler is the Root Grenadier, a nasty explosive-firing, rot-spreading ranged elite that seems to have no trouble bashing your head in if it gets too close. The Root Apostate seems to function a lot like either the Shock Wardens or Storm Wardens before Yeisha succumbed to the Root. It appears we'll be dealing with various ranged projectile attacks and targeted beam attacks, keeping us moving around amidst other enemies. It even appears to have the ability to resurrect fallen Root, meaning this elite should be the absolute priority to focus down. We also got a detailed look at several of the rank and file enemies that will make up the bulk of the Root forces. A new version of the Root Flyer can be seen on Yeisha that charges up energy balls and sets itself up almost like a turret firing down upon our character. It also doesn't seem to mind getting more aggressive and melee focused, teleporting towards the player or just straight up rushing it with 2 large claws. There also seems to be a new pack-oriented variant of the Root Tumbler that rolls aggressively towards the player covered in red spikes. We also got to see new explosive root that thankfully don't run at you like the annoying rotworts. These instead seem to shamble towards the player, but are much more resilient to damage, with their explosive effect happening with a bit of a delay after being knocked down. When it comes to the Fae, we've learned about two distinct enemies. First up is the Fae Painless. What we initially thought was a boss is actually an extremely threatening elite mob. It seems incredibly resilient and has no problem running up to you with free, excruciatingly painful hugs. Oh, and he's got a few heavy, highly telegraphed attacks in there as well. Now, the real highlight enemy thus far that made Livid and I sit forward in our chairs was the Fae Golden Knight. This elite enemy moves unlike anything we've really seen in Remnant, with quick teleport-like movements to close the gap, elegant wide sweeping attacks with its lethal longsword, and even throws deadly arcs of golden light when at range. I can already tell you right now, many a player will be caught off guard with this particular enemy. In terms of the Dran, at the time of making this video, we've seen really only two enemies in action from that area. The first is the Chainsaw Dran, clearly an elite that gives us serious Resident Evil vibes, and the second is the Bone Harvester, a supersized rat monstrosity that lurks in the shadows ready to pounce on you and your team. Keep in mind, this is just a fraction of the new general threats in Remnant 2, but it already has us extremely excited by how much the enemies seem to have evolved. Last up in our Ultimate preview, let's talk about the known and potential bosses. Boss fights across the board received a hard look, and the notion that ads were too prevalent in boss arenas over actual boss mechanics was taken seriously. Boss fights, for the most part in Remnant 2, will focus heavily on mechanics and phases that shift how a boss engages the player. This means more attack patterns to learn, more immersive fights overall, and less death to random mobs that spawn outside your field of vision. We already know on Yeisha in the floating landmass section, we'll have a run-in with the Mother Mind. It utilizes large sweeping attacks, trying to impale you with downward sweeping claws, and even charges up to break the platform beneath you, adding an element of time to the encounter before you run out of landmass. Let's also not forget the pools of damaging root rot it'll create across the entire arena. It seems like a solid boss fight that will reward you with the cordyceps gland for some fun weapon mod experimentation. During the livestream, we also got to see the encounter with Keula's Shadow, a hulking root monstrosity that tries to drive you into deep water to remove your ability to dodge, making the arena and boss mechanics a bigger threat than any additional mobs ever could. We also know we'll face the Nightweaver at some point, an incredibly agile, spectral entity that is essentially the twisted manifestation of the Fae Goddess of Sleep. It's creepy and looks incredibly evasive, and even seems to have several ways to pick you up or pin you to the ground. The Ravager, as we explained earlier, will also be making a return, this time corrupted by the root. He'll feature leaping and tail-based attacks, energy waves, and debilitating AoE howls, all while breaking apart the arena you desperately try to find cover in. Then there is the boss equivalent of that Fae Golden Knight we talked about before, and this guy really loves to use fire. Fire swords, fire teleports, fire rings, it's all there, and it looks absolutely insane. Finally, two quick callouts. The first is this Fae or Dran riding a horned, cat-like creature perched atop a building. If this fight is anything like the Rider and the Work fight from the recent expansion, we're extremely excited. The last callout is the brief look we had at what is clearly the corrupted version of the Pan Guardian from Chronos Before the Ashes, the prequel to Remnant. It's all coming full circle, and we have no idea what to expect from this fight. There is no use denying it. Remnant 2 is one of our most anticipated games of the year. Not only was Remnant from the Ashes incredibly underrated, but the team developing Remnant 2 is filled with dedicated and proven veterans of the industry. I'm not just saying that either. The Gunfire Games team has a catalog of games that reinforce their reputation. We couldn't be more excited about Remnant 2, and hopefully now you are too. Friends, this video took a ton of time to put together, and you better believe we'll be covering this game top to bottom. If Remnant 2 is even remotely on your radar and you want more videos like guides, boss breakdowns, and more in your feed, do me a solid, hit that thumbs up and consider subscribing. It goes a long way to allowing us to keep providing you quality content just like this. I also want to invite you to join the Legacy Gaming community on Discord. It's a fantastic place to hang out, party up for all things Remnant, and meet a ton of cool new people interested in the same types of games you are. So check out the link in the description below. My name is Kodiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.